Hello and welcome to Becky Live for our February 2022 topic of accountability. So I am really excited to cover this because I feel like we've kind of gotten off track with accountability, and I'm going to cover that a little bit throughout the dialogue. But a little bit about who I am. I'm the CEO of Vertical Leadership Consulting. So we specialize in a couple of things. One, leadership development, more specifically developing complexity of thinking. And then the other aspect is creating high quality connections. So how do we create energizing exchanges within the work environment that energize us rather than we experience work as like draining all our energy, like an energy vampire has swooped in and sucked us dry. So that's kind of our focus area. And today I'm going to be talking about accountability. And I'm going to do that in a couple of different ways. I'm going to talk about what it is. I always like to start with kind of the grounding of a definition and how I conceptualize accountability. I'm going to talk about what gets in the way. So there are some things, with the way our brain works that does get in the way. And then I always end with just a few suggestions. So if you're a leader, these are just a few tips that you can do to help improve your capacity of being accountable. So again, we start with the definition. Accountable is really answerable, literally liable to be called to account. And what I always look at is where is the origin of the word? And if we look at the origin of account, it really is to count or enumerate. It really was meant to kind of be a reckoning for a collection of debt, really, or some sort of cost that you were associated with. If we add the able part, it really means we're capable of or worthy of. So, being capable of counting for the money given or received or rendering a reckoning. If we look at accountability, you can see it's really the state of being answerable. And so needing to answer to something. And what really struck me is later on, I'm going to refer to this, but this is kind of the dilemma of accountability today, that it has become kind of a accounting system of what's going on. So I spent some time this week just kind of brainstorming and thinking about what does accountability mean to me? And if you've listened to any of my previous YouTube talks, I do, spend some time talking about how we have these different worldviews. I'm mainly embedded in the dominant worldview, which we all are part of, which is the colonialism. And there's a lot of problems going on. And we see a lot of things that are being activated in the world to try to counter that. All right. But we're still embedded in that. And so it is hard to make progress and counter it. And then I'm oftentimes invited into a worldview, one of more of indigenous or relational. So I continue to try to strive and live more towards that every day with the full knowledge and awareness that I'm not fully embedded in that. I am invited in, and I have moments where I feel like I'm doing a good job of practicing that. But then, my origins are really in this dominant colonial worldview. And so those are things that are hard to shed. So when I thought about accountability, I kind of wanted to honor that I'm really in that dominant worldview, and how does that show up, and how does accountability differ? And in the center, I put values and culture. And I think when we look around kind of the different ways that people experience accountability, even in the United States, there's different levels of accountability depending on where you live. In the United States, or even maybe the experience you had, whether you had more of an urban upbringing, or whether you had more of a rural one, or whether you were a latchkey kid, or you had parents that took care of everything. This establishes kind of a relationship that you have with accountability. And so I've got relationship listed there as well, but I think it's even more than that. It's as we get into the work, what type of relationship do I have with the work, with the person asking me to do the work? I think it also has aspects of energy. Again, is this something that gives me energy, or something that I really dread doing? And how does accountability show up in the way I'm being held accountable? Is it activating and motivating me with energy, or is it depleting me? And I think the other aspect is motivations is, it's really easy to just call someone to task on something without really stepping back and saying, look, I would be motivated to do it in this way. But is this other person have that same motivation? And I think even outcomes, we're not always really clear on what those outcomes are. And so it kind of muddies the water of accountability. But, again, our values, our culture, our relationship, our motivations can really impact how we see those outcomes. And even the aspect that I work with complexity of thinking, what you can see um, really determines how you see the outcomes. All right. And so if you have a leader who's several stages ahead in complexity of thinking, they're going to see different outcomes and nuance than someone who's at an earlier stage. And then I kind of think about accountability as this continuum. I think accountability, we've kind of gotten into this carrot or stick dilemma, but there's a lot in between. All right. And I think one of the things inherent in leadership right now is we have to recognize that we are embedded in tensions every day as a leader. And so we can't just be directive, or we can't just be engaging. We have to be able to do both, and we have to be able to assess the situation and know what needs to happen. And I think accountability is the same way, that there's this continuum. I have to look at what are the values, what are the motivations, what are the outcomes, what are the relationships, and then I have to look at that full range of things that I can do within accountability to look and see what matches and fits the situation best. I took a look at some accountability data. So I typically don't always like to go to the Harvard Business Review, but it is always a quick way to get some quick synthesis of data, which I needed this week. So I have a link, or I have a source for the article if you want to go out and read it. But it was really interesting to me that 82% of managers acknowledge they have limited to no ability to hold others accountable successfully. And I have seen this even within organizations that I work with. That people are given a lot of leeway, and there's a reason why they're giving that leeway. And even with COVID, there was a lot of leeway given because we all weren't used to needing to be resilient. And so we were struggling with some day-to-day things, let alone actually completing our work tasks. But it is interesting to see that managers feel like they don't have the ability to hold people accountable, whereas 91% of employees say that effectively holding others accountable is one of the company's top leadership development needs. So, and it's this interesting paradox of employees actually do kind of want to be held accountable. It's just the way in which we go about doing that. And then Gallup talks about 14% of employees feel performance is managed in a way that motivates them. 26% report getting feedback less than once a year. Of course, you have to take that kind of with a grain of salt. Sometimes I find that employees think they haven't received feedback when indeed they've been receiving a lot of feedback, maybe just not direct. 20% feel that their performance metrics are within their control, and then 40% feel as if their manager holds them accountable to the goals they set. So obviously there's some room there to improve in accountability. So what gets in the way? Well, if we go back to kind of the definition where the origin of the word is counting, all right, this is really what has created a problem. Accountability is little more than a process of scorekeeping. And within organizations, there are lots of processes of scorekeeping, whether it's performance management, it's goal setting, it's development plans, it's financial records, it's customer service surveys. We have a lot of ways of scorekeeping, and what that yields is really this built-in negativity bias. So last month in awareness, we talked about all the we highlighted a little bit the cognitive biases, all of them that exist. Well, this scorekeeping really activates this negativity bias, which we already have pretty strongly, where leaders are reflexively hunting for shortfalls, and then they tally within a forced categorization. All right. So they're given this scoring, or they have to categorize their employees in a certain way. And there was a recent neuroscientific study that revealed that your brain actually responds to being categorically rated with a sense of being threatened, all right, where you literally feel unsafe, and we keep talking about psychological safety, but a lot of the ways in which we approach work, and specifically accountability, don't help us feel safe. So what do we do? Well, a couple of suggestions that I want you to consider is, one, looking at clarity. I do see this daily as I'm working with clients. We suffer from too little clarity rather than too much. So a manager will think that they have made something crystal clear. I will talk to that employee who will tell me a completely different story. And oftentimes it doesn't even line up. It's like I'm hearing two very distinctly different stories, and they were together in the same room having this conversation. So I think as leaders, we have to really take a step back and say, am I being clear? What needs to be done? When does it need to be done? And how will you assess whether it was done satisfactorily? And is this the right person to do this? And then, have I communicated this information to the other person? Because if they're not clear on it, if they can't uh, respond back or repeat back what I've said, then there isn't clarity. All right. And so I think that that is really a good thing. I think also with clarity is inviting the other person in to help provide clarity. It can be sometimes we, as a leader, we get in the habit of telling, but we can do seeking as well, asking them what needs to be done. How will they know whether they've been successful, and inviting them into that conversation. I think the other thing is looking at control. I loved this cartoon that popped up for me lately. I'm sorry, but now the healthcare plan demands that you run a marathon. And if I got this, I would really struggle with this. I have some health issues, and so running a marathon just isn't a possibility for me. And oftentimes when we're giving people something to do, they really don't have control to make that happen. All right. Or we don't provide support along the way. I mean, you can just go out and look at all the Dilbert cartoons about how the lowest person on the totem pole always gets held accountable for things not going right. Right. And so I do think as leaders, we have to look at, with this clarity, does this person actually have the control? And then also, do they see that they have the control? Oftentimes we have the employees that are working for us that maybe they have past experiences, or maybe we've created experiences of giving them the message that they don't have control. So there's various aspects here that we need to look at, but I think control is an important one. I think the other one is motivation. There is a difference between being skilled enough to do it and having the will or the motivation to do it. All right. And so we have to look at both. We have to look at and say, is this the right person? Do they have the skills to actually be able to be successful with this task? And then we have to look at, do they have the motivation? And sometimes this motivation is complicated. I recently had a discussion with a leader. She has an employee that's kind of, peaks and valleys. All right. And there's been a big valley lately, but there's been a lot going on in the industry that they're in regards to COVID. And so the leader and I had a long discussion about, what this person is really an extrovert, and they're not getting any opportunities to get energy from other people. And so we talked about, the will may not be there because the energy just may not be there. Like we might need to be looking in a different place to stabilize things in order to be able to activate that motivation again. So even if we look at someone not having the will or motivation, sometimes if we peel the onion one more layer back, we can begin to see maybe something else that's at the root of it that maybe we can help support to then activate that motivation. But if the motivation isn't there continually, all right, then we have to ask ourselves a different question, right? Is it about holding them accountable to this task, or is it really that they just don't have the courage to admit that this really isn't something they want to be doing. And as a leader, I might need to take the courage to help them see that or to make that decision for them. And then the other aspect that I would recommend is milestones. So if they're not being successful on hitting six, you might have to break it down into the steps for them, especially if they're in early career or in earlier stages of complexity of thinking. You may be able to see the 6 steps to get there, but they may not be able to. And so we might have to kind of have these milestones for achieving. So getting clarity around what step number 1 is and what that looks like, what success is, and how they're going to go about doing it. And then showing them how to the next springboard is to item number 2. And I also find that even thinking about these milestones can help us as leaders be having that clarity, looking at control and looking at motivation, because we might actually look at this and say, wow, I know this person is not going to be motivated in milestone number 4. However, their colleague loves that type of work. Maybe I assign this task to both of them. All right. So it kind of gets us a chance to take a step back and look at things. All right, so that's a little bit about how I conceptualize accountability, some recommendations for you. And so I hope that they were helpful for you. We do have some upcoming events. So in March, we're going to be focusing on collaboration. So you can join us for those, and you can sign up for our newsletter to get links to sign up, or you can follow me on LinkedIn. And then in April, we're going to be focusing on energy, especially coming out of COVID. We just have had several decades of ease. And so we haven't been building this capacity of resilience, and it's really taken a toll on our energy. And so we're going to take a look at what that looks like and how to manage our energy. And then if you want to get in touch with me and bring something within your organization, whether it's leadership development or even looking at creating high quality connections, I'd love to have a conversation with you, and you can contact me here. So thanks and have a great day.